So I'm very pleased to introduce Kenton. So Kenton is Senior Research Scientist here at the National Center for Supercomputer Applications. Previously he was at UCAR, but he did his graduate in California in computer science, but he did do his PhD in computer science at Illinois. Kenton has a number of different skills, including software cyber infrastructure, software frameworks, and applied machine learning as well, among others. So Kenton.
Thanks. I'm Kenton McHenry. Thanks for the introduction. I'm the Deputy Director for the Software Division here at NCSA. I was going to start off by just talking a little bit about that group. It's a newly formed division. It's led by Dan Katz, who's not here today. Basically encompasses software pieces that have existed at NCSA for some time and are trying to bring them together into a more coherent thing to really represent what NCSA is capable of doing in terms of software. And this includes an R&D division plus our support divisions for both Exceed, Blue Waters, and the PSP programs. And so the objective is really to kind of grow the software ecosystem in terms of the software side of things and to build application ecosystems in terms of who we support and the kind of tools that we provide to other communities on the application side of things. We span a number of different projects. Each of these bubbles is basically a project, and we try to line them up in terms of synergies, in terms of reusable software components and frameworks and skill sets between our software developers to try to maximize what each project is able to get. So we're able to give projects with small amounts of effort, a quarter of an FTE, basically something to get going day one by building off of a much larger project that has 10 FTEs. And so we basically manage this on a quarter-by-quarter basis, trying to maximize what we do and the impact that we make with our collaborators. The main thing I'm going to talk about today is one of the efforts NCSA is involved in. It's this National Data Service Consortium. And basically what the idea there is it's towards getting to a point where scientific data, and eventually I would say software, is a publishable entity on its own. And you basically get credit for those kinds of things as part of your career path. And so basically making it so that you can publish, share, link, search, and reuse data sets from all communities, outside your own included, and lead to novel discoveries. I filled this up as an example. This was in the Washington Post a few months back, basically describing one of these scenarios where on the NIH side of things, they basically brought together a number of different data sets from a number of different countries, and they were able to make this discovery about this molecular process regarding schizophrenia. The program officer goes into basically saying in that article how difficult it was, how this couldn't have been done years ago, and many of the researchers were really hesitant to even share their data. But it led to this kind of discovery. And so the idea from the National Data Service side of things is the National Data Service is making this much more easy, making it much more frequent so these kind of things happen more often. So what's involved towards publishing scientific data? Well, the obvious thing is storage. That's probably the more mundane of the aspects of this. The side that is often neglected is on the service side of things. So just storing the bytes themselves isn't useful. Can anybody in the room tell me what this is? The string of ones and zeros here? Any guesses? Not very useful as it is, unless you look it up or are a really hardcore nerd. It's from a movie. It's 42. So basically, it's not very useful as it is. That's what you get when you just stick your data on a hard drive. You need all these services of it to make any kind of use of it. Tell what the information is, what the contents are. And so this was with regards to metadata, curation tools, putting indexes on large collections so you could find stuff, abstracting the storage so if the hard drives die, it just moves it to another place, replication, all kinds of different services. And when you get down that path, you end up with this. There are R&D efforts basically building services, and it's endless. I stopped at some point because I filled up the screen. And basically what's happened is NSF, NIH, all these government agencies are very much aware that needs to happen. And they're funding all these different efforts, but they kind of overlap. Some of them repeat what each other is doing. They all have separate communities. They're in silos. And they all adamantly fight for their software versus their software. And they're not really coming together in terms of a cohesive thing that makes it easier for you to publish, share, and reuse data. So what NDS is really trying to do is bring them together, make them work together, addressing really interoperability and the standards among these things so that they can kind of talk to each other, and you don't have to worry about which one to pick or how they interact. They just kind of do. And this is in collaboration with the Research Data Alliance, who really is pushing the standards side of things. And so the NDS Consortium is basically a collaboration amongst universities, libraries, computation and data centers, cyber infrastructure efforts like the ones that fell out from before, community efforts, large ones like LSST and LIGO, and publishers. Nature, Elsevier, IEEE, they're all involved in this towards getting to a world where this kind of thing is an actual thing. And so what we've been doing on the NDS side of things, some of the things we've been doing, is basically taking those components and kind of breaking them down so that we can kind of find the canonical pieces, parts that we can then focus on and also find the gaps on and bring them together for the scientific community. And so the infrastructure side of things, those are more or less known: networking, storage, security, HPC, things like that. On the data service side of things, that's where the real work is. So there's different aspects. There's transfers, large amounts of data, robustly transferring amount of data, abstracting the storage and replication of the data, describing the data with metadata and provenance trails and such. And so what we've been doing is basically taking those efforts and kind of building this matrix of what each one does and does well, not just on the side. And trying to build that up as a community so that we can see where those gaps are and where these pieces are. And, as a consortium, deal with those standards that need to be created or used if they already exist, and actually implement them in these efforts, with these efforts involved in the NDS See as well. So this is a long matrix. And so the idea is to get to a point where these tools and services aren't really associated with any particular name or project effort, but they're just things on their own. There's a data transfer service. There's an identity service. There's a data storage service, like pieces of the internet, really. There's a DNS. There's a router. There's all these things for data, for scientific data. And so this is an analogy that goes along that way that I stole from the Research Data Alliance. What we're really trying to do is along the lines of what we did for the internet. So it doesn't matter what web browser you use. We all have different web browsers we prefer. It doesn't matter what web server the sysadmin sets up. They all talk to each other. You can swap them out. It doesn't matter. It's because there's protocols and standards in the way. There's TCP/IP, HTTP, HTML. And so we want that for these data R&D efforts that deal with those aspects of publishing scientific data, so that you can mix and match any one of these archive repository, pieces of software and use whatever kind of portal interface you want, whatever scientific notebook you want, and it'll just work together. So what we've been doing, one of the things the NCSA team has been doing basically as part of this NDS See effort, is building this tool called the NDS Labs Workbench, as well as NDS Labs, to kind of support these efforts. I'm not going to go into it because I don't have time. But basically what it is it's sort of like an app store for these R&D efforts that are out there right now. Its main purpose is towards allowing developers to easily instantiate and deploy these things. So basically what you could do is you can drag and drop these pieces over here, say launch, and it actually sets it up for you. This little arrow here basically is a URL that pops out of it. If it spawns a web page, you can just go to it there. So you spawn this Dataverse archive, you go to that link, and you can actually have your Dataverse archive. And so you can play around with addressing interoperability, writing an adapter, so it takes input from one and output to another. And so one thing that we often see, though, is this has potential benefit also for the scientific community at large in terms of finding these pieces of software, exposure to them, and trying them out for your efforts in terms of data management aspects to everything that we do these days, a requirement by NSF and other agencies as well. And so we're not really set up to do that at the moment, but this is something that's potentially doable at some point, too, as a low-hanging fruit from this kind of thing. On the other side of things, we also engage actively in the development efforts of our collaborators towards the mission of the NDS See, which is basically developing reusable components, not reinventing the wheel, exposing the community we're working with to these components, addressing interoperability, and so forth. So we've been doing this kind of thing for the Plants in Silico effort. That's one of the efforts that we're involved with at the moment. So on the Plants in Silico side of things, in terms of cyber infrastructure, the problems that they're addressing there are basically as they're trying to simulate a plant, the plant growth, is that there is numerous models involved. And they're written in multiple languages by different students who are working on these things as part of their theses. And so that's a challenge in its own. You have different environments that they're using. You have different languages, programming languages they're using, different levels of skill. And so you have to kind of navigate that in terms of if you want to have any hope of bringing these pieces together. The models are under active development. They're not done, and they may never be done. And so we kind of have to deal with that as well. So not just the code, but also the data types. How they dump their data, the outputs, how they ingest their inputs. It kind of changes over time, and you kind of have to accommodate that as well. And then integration with other data sources between the models. One spits out X, the other accepts Y. You got to do something about that. Accept the format, or adopt some sort of standard format. And data ingestion from the raw data in the first place. Taking that raw data, whatever format it is, and putting it into the models. So there's a variety of different models involved in the Plants in Silico effort at various levels, molecular level, cellular level, and so forth. And the idea is to kind of integrate them together What the team has been doing is basically cataloging, putting the code in repositories, adopting standard practices in terms of software development, enumerating the formats that are used by each of those models and kind of documenting those things. They've been going through a list of what each one takes, what each one spits out, trying to come to some sort of agreements and standards. And so what they've been working on initially is basically moving from manually executed local code on your laptop per se to services. So things that kind of spawn and loop forever in a thread to basically be available and then attached to something that can basically integrate it with other models. So there's these technologies like a messaging bus. And so one of the ones they're looking at is called RabbitMQ, basically a distributed messaging bus. And these models basically, ideally, will connect to that, pass information back and forth. Other models that can ingest that information will take it off of there, do something else, put it back on, take it off, put it back on, and so forth, until you get to some point where you can basically look at the output results in a Jupyter Notebook, perhaps, and see what you got there. So towards this involves formalizing communication, handling the data movement, if there's large amounts of data, dealing with that, with some of those services above, transforming the data with some of those services above, leveraging other frameworks. And so Gabrielle Allen, our director of R&E, will go into some of those frameworks in a minute. One of the ones, in terms of the similar projects we've done in the past, I just wanted to touch on one of them. There's this project called Pecan on the ecology side of things, which, like the Plants in Silico effort, was a faculty fellowship here at NCSA many years ago. And from that, it spawned into a much larger effort with many contributors all over the country, annual workshops, and so forth, into much bigger projects. And so we're trying to do the same thing here as we did there. What they were trying to do is on the ecology side of things, trying to model how carbon is stored in plant life over long periods of time from decades to millennia. Different models give different results, or as you go more in the future, they vary even more greatly. And so the idea was to kind of do a sensitivity analysis, see where what parameters affect what, maybe to get a better picture of what the future is going to actually look like. And very much similar kind of things, different models, different data sources, lots of conversions that have to take place, lots of working with the students involved, getting them to adopt software practices, getting them to adopt standard formats and outputs and so forth. And so one of the efforts there, so basically what they ended up doing is building their own framework. It's called Pecan. And basically does all these things, takes all these different models from different labs around the country and universities, uses an infrastructure called Brown Dog for data transformation, and kind of brings all those things together for a bigger picture. So I'm going to hand it off to Gabby here, and she'll go over a couple other frameworks that we have here at NCSA that may come into with the Plants in Silico effort. Do you want to use this?
I think what is that?
The clicker.
OK, we'll try. Hi, so I'm Gabrielle Allen. I'm the Associate Director here for Research and Education. Also, I'm a faculty member in the Astronomy Department. So I thought enough of this plant stuff. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about black holes and change the things. But really, it's just an excuse to tell you. I just want to tell you for a few minutes each about a couple of the other kinds of software packages that we do with here that are coming from the sort of scientific software part of how we think about large-scale frameworks that could be useful as you move from working with a few people to many hundreds of people, and also when you think about things that may need to run at scale on resources like our Blue Waters machine. Running at scale is a single initial value problem. I think some of the components of what you're talking about involve fluid flow and structural modeling and so on. So this is really building on what Ed Seidel talked about in his introductory talk this morning, and a few more details about some of the experience that we've had in developing kinds of packages for the astrophysics community. And so this is my background is black holes, and you might have seen it's a very exciting time that this is just this year we've discovered for the first time gravitational wave signals have been detected, black holes have been confirmed that they exist. This is actually the problem that I've been working on for the whole of my career since I was like 21 or something. So it was all about taking observations, or the observations that we thought were going to be coming. Looking at, my part was really the models and simulations, how you take Einstein's equations, convert them into models, so that our big holy grail goal was this, to come out with this waveform that we would then, this is just a cartoon, that we would understand what is the signal when two black holes collide together. And so this is people have been working on this for 30 or 40 years, many students working on it, many faculty, researchers, a couple of grand challenge problem activities. And just this year, we actually found the solution. LIGO detected a gravitational signal. That's the data straight from the detector at the top. This one here, this is the signal which is predicted by numerical relativity. So our code was one of the codes that was used to confirm that this would be the waveform that you would expect if you had two black holes of the masses that were detected colliding together. So this is just that we've had so many people working together on over the years, and it's a software. It's really been about modeling and software, both on the data analysis side and on the initial value modeling of actual black hole and neutron star systems. This was just the start, though. These were black holes. Black holes are actually very easy because there's no matter in them. They're mathematics, just a vacuum. We now move into relativistic equations for neutron stars, relativistic matter. So we've got magnetohydrodynamics, we've got radiation transport for photons, we've got neutrinos, we've got chemical reactions, all kinds of stuff. So the whole problem becomes much more complicated, I think much more along the lines of the kinds of models that you're talking about for plants. We also have a big scale problem because we need to model a large part of the cosmos, even though the black hole or the neutron star is actually a very small object. So we really have a problem that needs petascale computing. So our solution for people to work together on this was we designed a framework called Cactus. The URL is www.cactuscode.org. It turns out to be a plant, but that's not important, so don't get confused. It's not for plants, it's for black holes. It's from the start, it's been an open source component framework for high performance computing. Our first version was in 1997, so this has kind of been around for quite a while. And the real thing of it that is, I think, the concept to explain here is that it was a modular system, so a component, a modeling framework where we provided high-level abstractions so that the students and the postdocs involved in writing the code didn't have to understand a lot about high-performance computing or parallel computing. They could program. In that time, they were programming in Fortran. Now they program in C or C++. And we had these components, which were, to be cute, we called thorns, like for a cactus, that were defined by a few parameters and variables and methods. And then we had a cactus flesh that sort of plugs them all together. So they all sort of stick into this cactus. And then the cactus flesh sort of figures out how to pass variables and glue the whole thing together. And this was the motivations were to have a lot of people working together, to stop having to rewrite codes. And each time a student leaves or a postdoc leaves, you have to start again from scratch. But to be able to work on a single code base with people working on different parts of that, but also end up with a code that you really can run at scale, at really large scales on the biggest supercomputers available then. And we also were working with different applications, so not just black hole people, but CFD, coastal science, petroleum engineering, and basically any application that could use a component framework to solve an initial value problem. And so this is kind of the picture version, that the idea that we have the core flesh, which takes care of a few things like handling parameters, handling errors, has the make system, defines what a grid variable is, and then everything else is a thorn, whether it's the initial data for black holes or the evolution scheme for black holes. Maybe it's an elliptic equation solver, a multi-grid solver. But basically everything else is a plug-in thorn that can be replaced. This model also was very useful for us because it meant that we could really get computer scientists engaged. They didn't have to learn about black holes. They could write a very abstract solver that we needed, or a faster parallel system, or a new I/O method. And they could right away plug it into the framework, and suddenly this whole community of black hole modelers was using their new I/O method or new parallel scheme, so it was able to integrate with new technologies in a very good way. Okay, and then basically in the end, what happens is all the components schedule their methods, and there's a very simple evolution loop, like you have in any kind of code. You set up initial data, you evolve forward one time step, you do some analysis, you do output, and then ideally have some fantastic visualizations. And this is just to show that this actually scales. So this is that our code scales up to 262,000 nodes. This was some years ago, the Blue G machine actually up at Argonne. So we could do this in such a way that we could keep things very scalable, but also very flexible in terms of people working together. And so the other part of this is that you have to build a community, because a lot of it is deciding what are the standards that the community works to. How do people get together and describe actually simple things? What are the names of the variables? What are the fundamental variables that everyone agrees on so that we can work together on this? So we have what we call the Isodyne Toolkit Consortium, which is really the set of users who are using our toolkit. This is about half of the community that do solving Einstein's equations, which is a pretty small community, but you can see here of our toolkit around the world. And then the consortium is just a method that we've evolved for developing and supporting this open source software for relativistic astrophysics. The cool thing is we can provide complete, you can download from the webpage a complete open source code for modeling black holes or modeling neutron stars, and go and run it and write to the the help desk if you have any problems. And so this is, this really changes the ability for students to get involved in the field, for postdocs to do their research. So we have over 100 members, 50 sites, 14 countries who are either using or contributing code. We have about 150 modules that are specifically for the relativity examples. We also, though, the consortium also manages some of the other software, like the visualization software, some tools, some analysis tools that can interpret the data at the end. We have summer schools every year but mainly for new students who to have a 2-week intensive course on how to use the toolkit. So that's Cactus. This is one of the things that we're, in the Isodyne Toolkit, we have a new NSF award here that's going to be supporting this. Another new NSF award that we have for software that Dan Katz, this is Dan who isn't able to be here today, is a workflow framework, which also want to mention called Swift. Click through his slides. So this is a workflow to help coordinate complex different models that are running and complex workflow situations. So for the black hole example, we don't need a workflow tool for running our models of black holes and neutron stars, but the LIGO Consortium have a very complicated set of template matching and model workflows that they need to coordinate as they pull in data from the Gravitational Wave Observatory. They actually use a workflow called Pecan. But it's kind of similar to this. It's a tool that enables people to do workflow programming that can take advantage of different HPC and high throughput systems, and really to be able to, in a very reliable and trustable way, integrate together data sources, execution codes, and output. And I think along the lines of some of the Kenton was also talking about. And particularly the Swift, one of their capabilities is they provide a mechanism that you can really simultaneously do these very large simulation sets across multiple HPC centers and also integrate cloud resources into the mix, which is the kind of becoming a more and more important thing. And so they're very targeted at this being able to couple together experimental and observational data with simulations, with many different models, and be able to do this in a very reliable way at scale. And they work with a lot of applications, and the focus of the project is really on developing software that can be used for science. So I'm not advocating for either of these approaches necessarily in what you're talking about, but I just want you to think that there's software out there that has already had many person-months of development over years and is already working to develop these kinds of abstract capabilities. So I think one of the things that hopefully we can advise you on here as you go through this process of developing things is just being a resource to help navigate some of these possibilities and hopefully partner with you on developing some of this. That's all I wanted to say. I don't know if there's any questions for me or Ken. Kenton will take the black hole questions, right? Yeah. I'm sorry, you said about inverse modeling?
So the question is about sort of tools for inverse modeling.
I think that, so we haven't really looked at inverse modeling with the Cactus framework. We did some work with reservoir simulations with Kalman filters, doing like design studies, but not inverse modeling yet. But I think that's something again that the people like reservoir engineers have a lot of experience in. I think there are toolkits out there for that. Is that an important part of this?
Yeah, I think what you're thinking of, Jim, is if we have sort of a computational representation of our system, the plant and how it functions, then, for example, particularly in the area of crop sciences, trying to predict what the optimal form will be for a given environment, given sort of nutrient supply or water supply and so on. And so inverting that is probably a very important application.
Okay.